Here again with Bryant Thomas, who's had a long career in news and commentary, as I have. In fact, we worked together decades ago. Bryant, we've been in this news game a long time. When we were in it and doing it commercially, compared to what it's become today, what are the main differences and what about it disturbs you?
Well, it's advocacy journalism at all levels. There's a tremendous push after the advent of Fox News to compete. Fox honed in on what it saw as a viable market for far-right people to have a steady diet of what they wanted to hear. And it worked. It worked. And suddenly the other members of the mainstream media decided, look, this is not going to be viable for us very long unless we find a way to compete. So on the other side of the spectrum, other members of the mainstream media did the same thing, but on the opposite side of the political spectrum.
Yeah, they also became echo chambers, parodying and reinforcing the pre-existing biases, prejudices, and beliefs of their niche audience. But, you know, that's not quite the same as advocacy journalism. In the old days, you could be an advocate, but as long as you stayed objective in what you reported, you whittled out the information, you contacted both sides, and you presented an objective case, hopefully, that would then advocate for change. But it's different today. Advocacy has actually become editorializing and propagandizing. That's the difference, is it not?
Partially. One of the things that you got to remember is that in order to do a story, no matter what story you do, you make a subjective decision about what you're going to do a story about. Then you make another subjective decision about where you're going to start that story. So this business about everything being objective is kind of specious. The whole point of having the press, generally both print and electronic, oversee the rest of government, legislative, judicial, and executive, is something that many people in this country don't understand and don't want to understand in many cases. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's still much better than whatever is in second place.
See, to me, it's much worse than it used to be. Now, in terms of subjectivity, there's always that element, you know, we can't escape it, but you may start subjectively, but then try to at least present the arguments objectively, you know, to the extent that you can. But today it's become so extreme. Fox on one side, CNN, MSNBC on the other side, they all have apparent axes to grind. They all have very opinionated reports that are disguised as straight news. So what I'm saying is, to me, it appears to be a loss of at least the attempt of objectivity that we used to have in the media.
Well, I think CNN is slightly different from MSNBC. MSNBC makes no doubt about the fact that they are the opposite of Fox. They don't make a secret out of that at all. CNN tries to play more down the middle than either MSNBC or Fox. So yes, there's an equal push from the other side, but Fox still remains dominant in terms of audience because they've been around longer and because their supporters are far more rabid than the people who watch MSNBC and CNN.
Well, you watch some of the commentators that are disguised as news reporters or wear both hats within the same span of a single shift in their news division. They are just as opinionated in a different way, perhaps more disguised, but just as slanted, I believe, as Fox is. And almost as frequently because, again, they're competing with each other now for these audiences that want to have their pre-existing beliefs reinforced. Now, take that whole bit with Don Lemon the other day with his two cohorts on the air, mocking Trump's base, talking in a Southern accent, and boy, they don't know where Ukraine is, and why should we have to know? You know, it went on and on. And, you know, you could say that, well, the contempt for them doesn't necessarily mean that they're not objective, but to me, it projects a pre-existing mental readiness to quickly dismiss any arguments from the other side, and that is not objectivity.
I agree. I think that the problem remains that we have someone in the White House who's very polarizing, more so than any other president we've ever had. So therefore, the reactions are going to be much more acute.
Yeah.
And as a result, this is what you get.
Well, I mean, to me, it's getting worse and worse. Do you see it that way? I mean, I think, we haven't hit bottom yet, but we're plunging towards a situation where the news is more propaganda now than information. And of course, that affects the fate of the nation, because if you don't have the press carrying out its traditional role of being a watchdog, then what you have are competing ministries of propaganda, and the public is getting less and less real information. To me, that's an acute, a growing, and a very serious danger. What do you think?
I think that's true. And all you have to do is look at the number of people in the 2016 election who were influenced by what they saw on the internet rather than in mainstream media. And that's an issue. But the bigger issue is this. As we saw in Watergate in the 70s, everybody was rallying to Richard Nixon's defense, especially on his side of the aisle, saying that, oh, the press is out to get him. He's not guilty of any of this. And then, of course, when the Watergate tapes came out, all of a sudden things changed. So all I'm saying to you is, if the same thing happens again this time, if the dirt continues to come out against Donald Trump, and especially if the Bolton thing begins to bubble up and implicate the president more directly, you're going to see a sea change of attitude among the electorate. That's a given. Whether it's going to be enough to force senators to kick him out of office is another issue.
But getting back to what you talked about being a situation where the social media is having a big influence now on purveying supposed information to the public, and you say that that's more that causes more of a situation where people are getting less information, rather than, because those heavy in social media don't follow the regular news outlets anymore. But what I'm saying is that even if you go to the regular news outlets, you're getting more and more opinion and propaganda disguised as news. So social media is making it much worse. But if you eliminated social media tomorrow, if you eliminated the internet tomorrow, you just had the news stations on, the main broadcast stations, the traditional ones, and the cable stations, it would not be much better of a situation.
Well, I think what happens is that people have forgotten that if they do get information on the website, there's no check and balance. It's strictly opinion.
That compounds the situation.
And that compounds the situation. And of course, it spills over into mainstream media, because they have to look at it to see what's going on, because sometimes there is a legitimate source for news and stories in some of that babble you see on the internet. So where do you draw the line? It's very tough. It's very tough. And add the competition factor among them, the major media outlets, and you really ask for trouble.
It seems to me it's such a denigration of what the Constitution and the First Amendment was all about. I mean, don't forget, Thomas Jefferson, one of those who pushed for the First Amendment, he himself thought the newspapers of the day were, quote, full of lies, scurrilous, scandalous. But yet he realized the importance of the free, with no limitations on the free press, and that people in balance would have enough sources to come to their own conclusions, the marketplace of ideas. But now that's all being trashed. I mean, the First Amendment is still intact technically, but the electronic media and even newspapers now, are paying less attention to their role as a watchdog and they're becoming more and more oriented to profits and grabbing and retaining audiences. So to me, wrapping this up now, Brian, I see that we're going into a downward spiral, and there's not much hope that it's going to get much better. What do you think?
Well, I think it could get better if this Trump impeachment materializes in something that is dynamic and exciting and certainly more compelling than what we've seen so far. If Trump is removed from office, then you're going to see an emboldened press saying, "I told you so." Even if Trump is not removed from office, he still has a stain on his record. And no matter what the White House says about that, he's still an impeached president, period. That's the end.
But Brian, considering the polarization of the media and of audiences, as we've been talking about, some of the liberal press will say, "Aha, I told you so." Fox and the conservative press are going to say it was a sham, it was a witch hunt, and the bad guys won. So I don't see it opening up the public to realizing the importance of a free press. I think that the effect will be just the opposite. It'll be more destructive because people are going to be taking sides and say that they removed this guy. It was all a bunch of baloney. It was a political witch hunt. They didn't go after Hillary. They didn't go after Biden, but they went after him. Selective prosecution. And it's going to be an intense war if he's removed.
I don't doubt that the far right is going to be impossible to be appeased on this. Doesn't matter. Yeah, even if Trump is not removed, they're going to still howl about the process from now till the cows come home.
As they are.
Nothing will make the far right happy at all. Even when they had total control of the government in the first 2 years of the Trump administration, they were not able to do a thing except pass a bill that gave tax breaks to the super rich. That's hardly what you call progress.
Okay, now let's say Trump is not removed, but he's damaged by the witnesses if they are brought in. More and more dirt is going to come out. Do you really think that's going to move the needle much between either side, towards either side? Because again, even without him being removed, the right wing and Fox News is going to say, this is all unfair to him. It was all a sham. It was all baloney. So again, the witnesses may reinforce what the liberal press has been saying about Trump, but the right wing is going to muddy it up saying, well, they're not credible. They're making this up. They weren't direct witnesses, blah, blah, blah. So again, we have a standoff. We have a divide, which has become even more intense, whether he's removed or not.
The only thing that I see as a possible wrinkle in that are the results of the 2018 election. 40 House seats were lost by the Republicans, and they were lost largely because the Democrats had a great ground game about talking to voters about health care, which is what's on the minds of most people in this country in poll after poll after poll. If the Democrats can continue to do the ground game they did in 2020, that they started in 2018, and take the message across the finish line that it isn't just health care, it's a panoply of other things that are wrong with this president that have gotten in the way of meaningful progress for middle-class voters. If they can get that message home, the Republicans are in serious trouble.
We shall see. Again, thanks for being with us, Bryant Thomas, a longtime newsman and commentator, most recently out of the AP News Bureau in Washington, D.C. Bryant, thanks for being with us.
You bet.